Have you ever watched a show that had a really cool concept, great character designs, and so much potential, only for it to swan dive off a cliff with just awful writing and pacing? Even worse when it's animated with stunning artwork and breathtaking animation, but the story falls so flat there's really no saving it? Well, for this video, I'm talking about just such a show. One that I really wanted to like, but was left disappointed, and honestly, I'm still pretty salty about it. And so, let's talk about one of the most important things you should keep in mind when writing any kind of story: pacing. Basically, how fast or slow the overall plot is moving. Hey there, it's me, Pixie, back once again with another video where I draw something and ramble on about whatever it is I'm interested in at the time. And I really like doing these videos where I sort of analyze a piece of media to give you an idea of what you should use in your writing, or what you should probably avoid. So the title of the video most likely gave away that I'm talking about Sword Art Online. And so of course this is your spoiler warning for the first half of Season 1. To be perfectly honest, that's as far into the series that I was able to watch, and I tried to watch it twice. Now, I also haven't read the light novels or the manga, and from what I read while researching this video, the pacing is much better in the source material. My issue is only with the show, and luckily for us, there's plenty of material to prove my points in the first 14 episodes. Seriously, before I looked that up, I could have sworn the first arc was longer than that. No wonder the show's got such a problem with pacing. I guess that's just the first example of how important proper pacing and character development really is for a story. So let's get into it. Now, I'm not going to go through every single episode detail by detail. We'll be here for hours if I did that. So I'm only going to talk about the first 3 episodes, and then I'll talk a little bit about the relationship between Kirito and Asuna. And so we start episode 1 with this new virtual reality gaming console called the Nerve Gear going public, and our main guy Kirito logging in. We learn that he was one of the beta testers, and he makes a new in-game friend named Klein. Then he spends a good bit of the episode teaching Klein the basics of the game. Then a few hours later, they realize that they can't log out, before suddenly they're teleported back to the town of beginnings to be told by the game's creator, Akihiko Kayaba, that he removed the logout feature. And if any player's Nerve Gear helmet is removed, or if their in-game health bar reaches 0, they'll die in real life. He then tells them he did all this because he wanted to be a god of his own domain, and the only way to log out and survive is to clear all of Aincrad's 100 floors. Alright, cool. So the first episode has me absolutely hooked. It's got a great concept that I haven't seen often. I mean, there is another show called Dot Hack Sign that had a similar thing going on, but that was only one character who couldn't log out, whereas Sword Art Online has 10,000 characters trapped in the game. And though both shows do have a lot of similar themes about being in a virtual reality space, in my opinion, Dot Hack Sign did do it a lot better. But anyway, back to Sword Art Online. It's got a super cool concept, and the first episode sets it up perfectly. It gives us this really interesting conflict and raises the stakes to show us what the characters are up against. And the few characters we meet in this episode are intriguing, and the main villain is pretty compelling. Like, I want to know more about this guy. Why did he do this to a bunch of innocent gamers? What are his motivations? Why is he obsessed with being a god of his own world? And how are the characters going to overcome this? How are they going to work through the dangers to survive and win? Episode 1 sets up the conflict and the questions and gets you pumped to find out what's going to happen next. All in all, a pretty solid episode. In the second episode, we get our first of many time skips. Now, I'm not gonna rag on time skips in writing. They can absolutely be vital in some stories, when used well. And really, I'm not mad at the time skip in this episode. It's been a month and we find out 2,000 players are already gone. The time skip here gives us another taste of what the stakes are, and we see what the characters are experiencing without having to go through the entire month in full detail. There are times in writing when you just can't give every single detail, or else you risk being too wordy or having a dull, boring story. And time skips can give your audience an idea of what's happening so far without overwhelming them with too much information. But back to the episode, we meet a player named Diavel, another beta tester, and he and his party are planning on getting a group of other players together to go fight the first floor's boss. Here we also meet our second main character of the series, Asuna. So all the players team up, Kirito and Asuna form a party, and the next day they all go off to take on the first boss. Now they're using a guide written by another beta tester to help them beat the boss, but it turns out the info they have on the first boss is wrong, and Diavel ends up dying. Because of this, some of the other players get upset and start bashing on beta testers for keeping info to themselves. Basically not bothering to help the new players get through the game, and they pretty much blame all of the beta testers for the current number of deaths. Kirito, apparently being a super stand-up guy, takes all the blame on himself, letting the other players call him a beater, which is basically a beta tester and a cheater. And so he decides to go off on his own, leaning into his lone wolf image. But here's one of my other issues with the series. It really feels like Kirito flips back and forth a lot between being an actual decent and caring person and being a total jerk. Normally I'm fine with this trope, where a character is all cold and calculating on the outside, but is actually a huge softie and deeply caring. But in Kirito's case, it doesn't feel genuine, and he just comes across as inconsistent. He's not a very compelling character, and it's really hard to be invested in his struggle. And then episode 3 opens with yet another time skip. This time we've gone from December 2022 to April 2023. That's about a 5-month skip. And suddenly Kirito is agreeing to join a guild that he saved in a labyrinth on one of Aincrad's floors. We don't actually see him saving them. We just join them in an inn afterwards, celebrating the fact that he saved them. Like, okay. He ends up joining them as a temporary member to help them get stronger, so they won't need him, but he makes a pretty big mistake here in my opinion. He doesn't tell them his actual character level. Now, you could argue that he didn't tell them so they wouldn't rely on him entirely to get them through the game. And so they would end up continue working to get better at the game themselves. But that's a pretty big detail to keep from your party members. And Kirito even goes off by himself a lot during this time to do a bunch more grinding himself for more levels, keeping him at a much higher level than the rest of the guild. And now I'm not sure if this is the case for Sword Art Online, but in my experience with these sorts of games where you level up a character and take on dungeons and bosses, the enemies tend to scale with you depending on your level. So the bosses would potentially scale to Kirito's level and end up being way too strong for the rest of the guild to properly be able to handle. And honestly, if that's the case, that explains what ends up happening to the guild later on this episode. And really, all of that is just to say that Kirito just doesn't really communicate all that well with the guild. He doesn't even seem to trust them all that much. And I'm supposed to believe that he's friends with these people? Like, I don't understand. And now, of course, again, take a wild guess what happens next in the episode. Did you guess time skip? If you did, you're right. we skipped ahead again a whole month to see the guild just doing some training. And we even get the bare minimum of Kirito kind of bonding with another member of the guild named Sachi. But we barely get to actually know any of these characters, or see how they all interact with each other. We know Sachi is afraid to die, and that's pretty much it. We get no other information about her. And then suddenly we're skipping another month to the guild deciding to go off to gather loot from a high-level labyrinth in order to impress their guild leader who's just gone off to buy the first guild house. And of course, those of us who've seen the show, we know what happens next. If you haven't seen the show, you could take a blind guess and probably still get it right. This time it's not a time skip. No, it's the entire guild dies. Well, except our main man Kirito, of course. Plot armor for days on that boy. Now Kirito does try to talk them out of going to the labyrinth, and then tries to stop them from setting off the trap when he realizes what's going on. But it's almost like that Willy Wonka scene where he's all, "Don't, stop, come back." My point here is he probably could have tried harder to stop them. Convince them they weren't ready for this particular fight. Maybe tell them his actual level or something. I don't know. It gets even worse too, as we find out later in the episode, through a flashback, that after Kirito told the guild leader what happened and told him his real level, the leader cursed out Kirito for being a beater and hiding that information, and then takes his own life. And that's it. The guild is all gone. And we don't even really know these characters. But of course we can't stop and process any of this because we're once again hit with a time skip. This time it's been another 6 or 7 months. And this is still episode 3, by the way. And now Kirito is going after the Christmas event boss to get some revival items so he can bring Sachi back. And all I can think is, why do I care? We met all these characters in the beginning of this episode, and barely halfway through the same episode, they're gone. Each episode is 23 minutes long, guys. We've had no time to get to know these characters, and no time to develop any sort of connection with them. We get a little bit about Sachi, and she was definitely one of the sadder character deaths. I mean, I guess that explains why Kirito was so keen on getting the revival item, because like I said, we do see at least a fraction of a friendship start to develop between them, but we only get a few minutes of this at most, in a show that is constantly throwing new information and scenarios at you, all rapid fire. There is no time to process anything. We barely get to know a lot of characters before they're gone. And we're expected to care about them. And we don't even get to process what's happened to them before we're on to the next thing. And it even feels like Kirito doesn't process the events. He mopes for about like a minute, and by the next episode he's already over it. Which of course doesn't help with the flip-flopping personality. And that's entirely because the pacing of this show is just so wicked fast. There are 3 time skips in episode 3 alone. We spend almost a year in one single episode. That's wild. We're jumping forward so much, so quick, I wouldn't be surprised if viewers had whiplash from all these jumps. Now, I'm not saying the story has to be a super slow burn. You can tell a very compelling story in a short amount of time. But that generally works better for a shorter storyline. And yeah, you can use time skips in shorter stories, but it doesn't work if you're skipping over all of the important character and story development. The amount of stuff that happens in Sword Art Online just gets nothing out of this kind of storytelling. Of course, I do get that it's difficult these days in animation to get a good amount of episodes to properly tell a story. And most anime tend to hover around 25 episodes per season. I mean, they can't all be Sailor Moon with 46 episodes per arc, or One Piece with its over 1,100 episodes overall. But the first two arcs of Sword Art Online absolutely would have benefited from each being its own season. I don't know about you, but I need some kind of development going on to care about or even enjoy a story. The Sword Art Online anime is more like a Cliff Notes or animatic of the original story. It gives us the basic, most important details, but doesn't actually tell us how we get from point A to point B. Not to mention, every new episode has Kirito at some new, insanely high level. They make this huge deal about him being strongest of all, but we barely see him do anything or any of the work he put in to actually get there. Even unlocking the dual blade skill was done off screen. Like, you know the saying, it's all about the journey, not the destination? Yeah, this show is all destination with like a quick jaunt down the street in between. There is so much happening and no real substance to the story. It doesn't matter what kind of story you're creating, there needs to be some context to let your audience know how these plot points and characters have developed. And, why they should even care about your characters and story. And I know that is a bit harsh sounding, but it's a pet peeve of mine when a story is rushed through to that level. And I'm not saying you have to give the readers or watchers everything, or leave in every single detail about what's going on. Depending on your medium, there's a certain balance in how much of the story you want to tell. On one hand, you write every minute detail and you risk giving away too much and spoiling your own story, or it ends up being just too long and too wordy. On the other hand, if you leave out huge parts of the story or leave out too much context, you end up with a story that's shallow and suffers because of it. And character development is also affected by poor pacing. Barely see Asuna and Kirito spending any time together in the early episodes. But by episode 7, they're potentially already dating. And then 3 episodes later, Kirito's proposing to her. But before that, they may have been in maybe 3 full episodes together. And to me, it always felt like they just didn't really like each other. Where did this relationship even come from? It's practically out of nowhere. Except it's not. Guys, they've been trapped in this game together for 2 years. Episode 7 takes place in June 2024, and episode 8 is 4 months later in October. That's a lot of time to pass between 2 episodes. And you've got 2 full years happening over the course of 8 episodes. That is freaking intense. That's a lot. It's wild. But really, I really, really wanted to like SAO. I love the concept, I love the artwork, and I love the character design. The animation is absolutely gorgeous and honestly the best part of the show. But none of that could make me care. I don't care about the characters or what happens to them. I don't even like Kirito or Asuna, or any of the characters for that matter. I just can't deal with such blatant disrespect of the pacing of a story. Like, come on. And I'm not saying writing is easy, because it really, really isn't. It is a lot of hard work, and finding a good balance of what to give the audience and what to withhold from them takes a lot of work and a lot of practice. And keeping pacing in mind can be just as hard. But it is such an important part of writing an engaging story, as well as creating characters that the audience will actually care about. Like I said before, I really wanted to like Sword Art Online, but I just could not get past the extreme fast pacing. And again, I only got through the first 15 episodes before I gave up. So really, this is all just my opinion of the first arc of the anime, and I'm not a fan. But if you enjoyed the show, that's all good. People can like and dislike different things. Preferences are a thing, and that's absolutely fine. I just wanted to talk about why I think the show doesn't really work. and what they could have potentially done better. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Or what other stories have been ruined by poor pacings? Also, I'm considering doing my next video either on some drawing tips that I picked up recently and would like to share, sort of like a tutorial kind of drawing video, I guess. Or also potentially about the writing issues of Twilight and my weird love of the first book despite the bad writing. So let me know which of those you'd be interested in seeing first. As always, you can check the description for that sweet Blue Sky link if you want. And I also have a Ko-Fi started with some commission slots open, so I'll leave that link there too. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. You're all awesome, and I hope to see you all again later. Bye for now!